Anyway, so what prompts these current contemplations on the I Ching? Partly is because the great producer Steve Bochco died recently. He produced Hill Street Blues, L.A. Law, NYPD Blue. Just major. He was probably the greatest, other than Rod Serling. Probably the greatest TV producer. And I worked for him years ago on Hill Street Blues, which I used to think was going to be enough to cement my fame. But now there's nobody with any color in their hair who's ever heard of Hill Street Blues. I don't know how that happened. But I mean, while in a world where I Love Lucy is still well known, Hill Street Blues with all its Emmys, it's like it never happened. Well, anyway, but so he died recently, and how that comes into the story of the I Ching is years ago when I was living in Venice. I had worked on Hill Street Blues. I had worked on some other shows, and then my agent set up a meeting with a guy named Terry Semmel, I think, and he had two sons, and I met them at Paramount, and I had an idea for a show about a TV news operation, pretty cliche, but, and they liked it, and they said they would call me, but when they called, they said, look, there are these two guys who actually worked on a news show. I think it was in Cleveland or something, and we want to partner them with you to executive produce this show. So I said, well, let me think about it. So I asked the I Ching, should I do this show? I mean, I don't like the idea that they're partnering with these two guys, but who've never done any TV shows, but they did have TV experience as news producers. So, but I guess I was a little proud, uppity. So it was a question to me. So I asked the I Ching, well, should I do this job for the Seminoles? And I did have a lot of money at that time saved and everything, and pension accounts and everything, but they knew, the I Ching knew, though I didn't, that I was going to need that money. So instead of saying, yeah, do it, they encouraged me not to do it. Don't work, don't do it, take it easy. I said, well, what, I need to, this is important to me, this is my career, right? And they said, no, it'll be better if I can explain one time how it says these things in hexagrams. It said it'll be better if you don't do it because you get a better job. I said, what? So through careful questioning over hours, I discerned that what it was saying was that Steve Bochco was going to call me to ask me to produce a show. Could be. Though in retrospect, I don't think that was ever really possible, but it sounded like it. It sounded good enough. So I turned down the job with this, and I said, I can't do it. I don't want to be paired up with these other guys, I'm sorry. So that was it. My agent was very upset. I mean, because just writing the pilot for that thing, would have been at least a big paycheck. But, and sit down to wait for Steve Bochco to call me to produce the show. Say, hey, So, all right, 3 years goes by, 5 years go by. What happened to Steve Bochco? I would ask the I Ching, what happened to Steve Bochco calling me to, because it was a very specific situation that they were setting up. He was going to call me. He was going to ask me to produce a show that he had thought of or that we once talked about together. And it made sense to me. It could have happened. So anyway, 10 years goes by, and this is not something, it's not something like where I would forget to ask, or where the answers were ever varied at all. Like they never said, no, that's not going to happen. What, are you kidding? It was always wait. How come Steve Bochco hasn't called me to ask me to produce? Wait. You know, is it okay if I go to New York this week? He might call this week. No, it's okay, but you just wait. It's going to happen. So recently, now, I was about 19. Let's say 20 years after the first question about Steve Bochco calling me and asking me to produce, he died. May he rest in peace. And I didn't know he was sick. He was like 74, pretty young. He was always in great shape. I mean, so I asked the I Ching, you know, after thinking, after it occurred to me, gee, he never called me to ask me to produce that show. You know, because you always, if the I Ching says something and it doesn't happen, they could always, you know, you can always put it off. They didn't give you a time, a schedule. You know, they're not working on the clock. Maybe they meant 20 years later, but he's dead. He's not going to call me. It's not going to happen. So I go to I say, what happened? How come Steve Bochco hasn't called me to ask me to produce a show? They say, wait. Now, that's just not possible. So, but to me, it has to be possible, or else I'm a total moron. So I go, what does wait mean? Maybe it's in his will. Maybe in his will, Steve Bochco writes, the one thing I want people to remember is that Ilya Katz and I were once discussing a show about specifically a New York police situation, and I'm leaving a certain number of millions of dollars so that he can put that show on. I guess something like that has to happen, or else what am I waiting for? but anyway, so that prompts some of these contemplations. You go, what's going on, you know? Don't they feel any responsibility to be honest? They were certainly consistent. For 20 years, they never once said it wasn't going to happen. Never once said, oh, forget it, you're a moron. Never. It was always going to happen. It was always a big deal, and it was always wait for Steve to call. Anyway, this seems like enough to upload. Let me see if it works.